opportunity to visit the US with your kind support, Honorable Speaker. And during that period, I had opportunity to engage with Kenyans living in the US, in the cities of Chicago, Seattle, Washington, D.C., and Houston. And it is the genesis of these questions that I've posed to the Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs out of my interaction with the Kenyans and including our diplomats at the Kenyan Embassy in Washington, D.C. Honorable Speaker, unfortunately, as I speak, I have not received the hard copy responses, but I hope the Secretariat is making arrangements. So I'm not aware whether the CS has actually put in written responses. But these are the questions, Honorable Speaker, and I will read the three of them. I'm sure that the CS can answer all of them at once. The first question to the CS is, could the Cabinet Secretary indicate the staffing levels by cadre at the Kenya Embassy in Washington, D.C., and the two Kenya consulates in Los Angeles and New York, and outline the roles of staff serving in each cadre? Secondly, Honorable Speaker, could the Cabinet Secretary explain how the staffing levels have impacted the operational efficiency of the said diplomatic missions, and clarify whether there are any plans to deploy additional staff? Lastly, Honorable Speaker, could the Cabinet Secretary also explain the delay in the issuance of national identity cards to Kenyans residing in the US and state what the ministry is doing to resolve the issue? I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Prime Cabinet Secretary, you may proceed to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first I would like to state that the hard copy has been released. Maybe it's just a delay to get to you, but it had been signed. On the first aspect of his question, to indicate the staffing levels by cadre at the Kenyan Embassy in Washington, D.C., the two consulates in Los Angeles and New York, and then outline the staff, the role of the staff. I wish to say that in the hard copy, in the response I've given, I've tabled the details of the home-based staff, indicating the authorized, the in-post, and the variants. I've done the same also for the other agencies. That is the Defense Attaché, the Education Attaché, Foreign Relations Officer, Trade Attaché, and Immigration. So in total, there's an indication, we indicate that the authorized is 17, but we have a deficit, and the authorized, the in-post is 14. So there's a variance of 3. I've also indicated in the permanent UN mission, I've also indicated that there is an immigration officer attached there to handle the consulate services. Mr. Speaker, sir, I have also attached the details of the Los Angeles, again on the same principle, the authorized, the in-post, and where there's any variance. Clearly, on the LA, both the authorized and in-post tally, that is a total of 7 as it stands now. I have also tabulated the responsibilities of all these officers. Mr. Speaker, it's a long list, so perhaps it may be necessary for the Honorable Senator to perhaps seek any clarification on 1 or 2 issues after he looks at that. The second aspect is about the efficiency. Explain how the staffing levels have impacted the operational efficiency of the said diplomatic missions, and clarify whether there are any plans to deploy additional staff. Mr. Speaker, definitely staffing levels have a direct influence on operational efficiency by affecting workload distribution, response times, and the overall capacity to manage diplomatic tasks Therefore, low staffing levels may occasion service deliveries such as delays in processing visas when we are doing the full angle of visas, but we still do it on a limited basis because, as you know, we are also a visa-free country now, but there are still some areas that require visa processing. We have aspects of managing communication and executing policy initiatives. So definitely, it is absolutely essential that proper staffing levels are in situ to avoid delays. The third aspect that I will touch to is the issue of the delay in the issuance of national identity cards to Kenyans residing in the United States of America, and what the ministry is doing to resolve this issue. Mr. Speaker, I would like to point out that the Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs serves as a facilitator coordinating the issuance of ID cards through the immigration attaches in missions abroad. In this case, identity cards are processed at our embassy in Washington, D.C., which is also in charge of the consulate in New York that processes identity cards for Kenyans in the eastern side of the US, and the consulate in LA that serves Kenyans on the western side. Mr. Speaker, some of the challenges we have that have occasioned delays include the following: issuance of registration on e-citizen, where the system sometimes rejects foreign numbers, where the one-time password has to be sent to the particular phone number used by for the registration. We are now sensitizing the diaspora to use the email option. B, we have the processing of ID cards is entirely manual, and verification of all applications has to be done by the National Registration Bureau. This causes a bit of delay, especially at missions that are not well staffed. In addition, in the event of queries, the request has to be channeled back to the mission to seek clarity from the applicant. I also want to bring to the attention of the Senate that the court case brought against the Maisha number did cause a general delay in identity card processing for both local and international applications. However, since the signing of that court order on 12th August 2024, processing and issuance of ID cards has now resumed normally. There is also an interesting scenario where some of the applicants have not collected their national identity cards and passports, which have been finalized at our missions. As of now, for instance, the immigration in New York has in its storage 8 ID cards, which the return mailing address given by the applicants were wrong and had been mailed back to the mission. Emails or calls to the applicants could not go through. Therefore, we still hold those IDs. I also would like to point out that through the Rapid Results Initiative by the State Department for Diaspora Affairs, where they, in collaboration with the State Department for Immigration and e-citizens, periodically decentralize the ID processing to other cities away from the embassy or consulates are located. This is undertaken through the Mobile Consular Services outreach exercise, which has seen 2,459 identity cards processed in outstations in Seattle, Atlanta, Minnesota, Dallas, Boston, and Houston. Another phase of this mobile consular services is being planned for the third quarter of the financial year 2024-25. On the issue of the e-citizens and the challenges of the OTP versus foreign cellular numbers, the Principal Secretary for Diaspora Affairs is engaging some of our local telcos on an option of an eSIM card, which the diaspora can use while away for both e-citizen. In addition, the State Department for Diaspora is preparing to deploy officers to support the service provision to the Kenyan diaspora in the 3 missions in the US. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I can say that the requirement is tabulated, so it may require further examination. And I just want to assure the House that either now or later, I or my PS, Dr. Singoi, would be happy to offer any written clarification beyond this.
Yes, Senator Eden Sifuna, you may ask 2 supplementary questions.
Yeah, Honorable Speaker, before I even go to the supplementary questions, I'm wholly disappointed by the quality of the response. I thought that the full title of the CS for Foreign Affairs also puts him in charge of coordination of other ministries. Surely, if there are issues that are in ministries other than the Foreign Affairs, I know we should direct it to the ministry itself, but being the person in charge of coordination of all the other ministries, I expected a more solid response, Honorable Speaker. Speaker, for instance, the response indicates that there is an ambassador and 1 in-post. That essentially means there's an ambassador deployed in Washington, D.C. I would want to know when the ambassador reported, because when I was there, the embassy was manned by a chargé d'affaires. There was no ambassador. I don't know when he reported. Secondly, Honorable Speaker, you will see the tabulation here. There is only 1 trade attaché for a country that is as important as the U.S., and I would have expected a discussion on the adequacy. When I was there, I was given an example, Honorable Speaker. A country like Vietnam has 4 agricultural attachés, indicating the seriousness with which they take their job. I would have expected a discussion about the adequacy of the staff that have been deployed. If you are telling us, Honorable Speaker, that you have 1 staff in the consulate in New York, what happens when that person falls sick? That is why there are all sorts of problems in these consulates, because you cannot have 1 person manning a station. It just doesn't make any sense. So that is the sort of discussion that I had expected, and I have to express my disappointment in the answer so that the Cabinet Secretary understands what I wanted to get from him. But in terms of follow-up questions, Honorable Speaker, first of all, the women in the U.S., Honorable CS, asked me to ask you specifically why it is that since 1963, with the first Kenyan ambassador, Brudi Nabwera, up to today, you have never seconded a woman as the ambassador of Kenya to the U.S. That is a question that the ladies asked me to put to the CS, and I would be remiss if I did not put to it. Maybe there is a thinking within government as to the capacity of women to be deployed in serious postings, such as Washington, D.C. Honorable Speaker, secondly, the problem with the delays in the processing of IDs, as the CS himself has alluded to, is that it's a manual process. People have to travel from all across the U.S., a country that is far more vast than, say, the EU. And if the CS would compare the deployment of diplomatic staff in the entire European Union, which is smaller in size than the American continent, Honorable Speaker, these people have to travel from all these far distances, 5-hour flights, 6-hour flights. Then you come to the embassy and you have to do this manual process as if you are at a DC's office in Kerugoya, Honorable Speaker. And then they are put in a diplomatic bag, they are sent here. There is no special office for processing of diaspora applications for IDs. They are just lumped together with other applications from, say, Kilifi, Bungoma, and Nairobi. And yet there is an office that was created, I think it is a department, on diaspora affairs. Can the CS shed light on the responsibilities of this office and what these people do in the diaspora office, if not just concentrate on these applications, and what they are doing to automate the process of processing of identification cards? Because, Honorable Speaker, the feedback was that because we have automated the application process and the processing of passports are faster than IDs that are still manual. So what is the plan, Honorable CS, for you to address these challenges to ensure that people get these documents, critical documents, in good time? I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Prime Cabinet Secretary, you may proceed to respond, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are quite a number of issues that are valid in the concerns that the Senator does raise. The first thing that I need to point out is that there's no discrimination against women in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And in fact, as we speak today, I can give you an example that in the UK, the High Commissioner is a lady. I would also want to point out that the ambassador for Kenya in Washington reported 2 weeks ago. So he's in station. And this comes, there's a cycle. Ambassadors and officers in missions have a cycle, a tour of duty of about 4 years. And in the process, the issue of their term expiring, it is staggered, it's not all at the same time. So this would have been a situation where you are visiting when the outgoing was also just preparing to come back or had just left, and that is Ambassador Amayo. So sometimes you are caught up in these cycles between transition, and I would say that that is the reason why maybe you did not meet the ambassador, but there's an ambassador as we speak today. I have indicated that the consular services through the diaspora affairs did yield about 2,500 IDs in different towns, and therefore we'll continue in the efforts to make sure that we reach out. Automation and technology are things we are pursuing within the context of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in linkage, in liaison even with the immigration, so that we can improve the services. So there are these delays that we hope to navigate through going forward. Finally, Mr. Speaker, it would be a big omission if I did not inform the Senate that one of the challenges that we have faced and we continue to face is actually the resource allocation. And I'll give a very clear example that, for instance, when we lost the finance bill, we have seriously had to do a serious haircut in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, just like other ministries. But when you look at it in the context of the resources that would have been available to make sure that we are seamless in our operations, as of now, let me admit that we are constrained financially, and it is a challenge that is facing the entire country. So we hope that within the context of the next financial year, as we progress, we can improve on the funding of our missions.
Senator Mungatana.
Asante sana Bwana Spika kwa kunipa nafasi hii. Namkaribisha waziri wetu mkuu kwa bunge letu la Senate. Na swali langu Bwana Spika linahusika pale kuhusu ni wangapi ambao wanafanya kazi katika ubalozi wa Amerika. Bwana Spika, kitambo kidogo nilifanya kazi katika wizara ya nchi za kigeni. Na kulikuwa shida pale kwa sababu watu wengi huwa wanataka kutoka Kenya waende kufanya kazi nchi za nje. Sasa swali ambalo nilikuwa nataka kufuatilia, ubalozi wa Amerika umeahidi kwamba pesa zikipatikana waziri utatuongezea wafanyikazi pale. Sisi tunataka kujua katika ile kuzigawa zile nafasi, ni wangapi wanatoka Tana River, ni wangapi wanatoka sehemu ya kaunti hii, kaunti hii, kaunti ile. Kwa sababu gani? Tunataka usawa. Hatutaki wizara iwe na shida ya kwamba pande moja, pande mbili, pande tatu ndio ziko katika wizara. Sasa mimi nauliza, katika wizara na ubalozi wa Amerika ni watu wangapi wanatoka Tana River, kaunti yetu? Na kama hawako hapo, nauliza katika ile breakdown ya wale ambao wanafanya kazi pale, kuna usawa? Na kama hakuna, waziri una mipango gani ya kuhakikisha kwamba katika ubalozi wa Amerika na balozi zingine kuna usawa kwa wale watu ambao wanaenda kufanya kazi za nje? Asante Bwana Spika.
Senator Catherine Muma. Prime Cabinet Secretary, you may note down the questions and then you can respond to them at a group.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, and welcome to the Senate, the Prime Cabinet Secretary. My question to you, Honorable Prime Cabinet Secretary, is whether we have a national policy guiding the ratio of appointment of ambassadors between politically appointed ambassadors and career diplomatic ambassadors. Honorable Prime Cabinet Secretary, my question is premised on the fact that international diplomatic relations is a very serious issue, and when we see appointments, sometimes we see more politically appointed ambassadors than career diplomats. So we would want to know whether we have a policy that guides on the ratio. Thank you.
Senator Okenyuri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to ask the Cabinet Secretary the following question: whether citizens in diaspora with the dual citizenship will also be required to register for Maisha card. Thank you.
Senator Kavindu Agnes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to first of all appreciate the CS for coming today. We've been waiting for him for a long, long time. Mr. Speaker, mine is a bit diverted, but he's aware of it, and I'm sure he can answer it. It's about how far he has gone with the issue of the compensation of the Kenyan victims, as in getting the amendment from the US Congress. Because when we were in America, we discussed about this in your presence, and you are aware of it, and I don't know how far you've gone with this issue. And I also want to know if you are aware that the victims who were at the embassy, serving at the Embassy of America here in Kenya, are getting the green cards to go to the US, and most of them are in their 80s. What are you doing about negotiating for them that their relatives who are younger can get the green cards and go and serve there? Because majority of them who are working there are now of age, and they cannot go and work unless they just go and stay there. And this is ongoing right now with the Embassy of America. Thank you.
Senator Osotsi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Prime CS, who is also my senior constituent from Vihiga County. Speaker, I would like to find out from the Prime CS, I can see from the response, there is a disparity in numbers between New York and Los Angeles. Ordinarily, we would expect that New York, being the leading economic hub of the US, will have more focus around it. We can see in New York we have 1 staff, and Los Angeles we have 7. So what informs this disparity? Number 2, I am shocked with the low staffing levels in the embassies in the US, which means probably in other countries is even worse, Mr. Speaker. And we know that the trend globally is focused around economic diplomacy. So can the Prime CS tell us what plans he has to upscale economic diplomacy through these various embassies and consulates? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Veronica.
Honorable Speaker, and welcome once again, Prime Cabinet Secretary. Commendably, the IEBC rolled out the voting rights for the diaspora, and the diaspora remittances are some of the highest exchange earners for our country, so hence the need for them to continue exercising their right to the presidential vote, to determine the presidential vote. Honorable Cabinet Secretary, have you considered rolling out consulates in states where Kenyans are we have a heavy population of Kenyans like Texas, Atlanta, besides Los Angeles and New York and Washington, where we have an embassy, seeing that these are the stations where the voting takes place in the United States? And have you also considered the cost of diaspora accessing this station is still very high? They would have to spend close to $1,000 to access a voting station when it's time for them to vote. What are you doing to mitigate that effect and reduction of cost and access to the stations where they need to vote every cycle of 5 years?
Senator Dulo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I wish to welcome CS. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask a question on office accommodation in various missions and commissions. I mean missions and embassies. Mr. Speaker, I sit in Committee of National Security and Foreign Relations of this House. CS, we have tried to get in touch so that we can discuss matters affecting our particular committee, but we are unable to get you, and I don't want to prosecute that here. But I remember 2015, there was a motion passed on the floor of this House regarding office accommodation by then Senator Fonyeri, Senator Mutahi Kagwe. Mr. Speaker, our last visit to UAE, the embassies were actually complaining about the value of Kenya shilling that has gone down, which has doubled actually the rent that they are paying within those missions and embassies. I remember in that particular motion, the senator was requesting that the money you are paying for those rents should be actually used in form of a loan to pay for those properties the government is actually occupying. Mr. Speaker, I've been to Switzerland, Geneva. The kind of office that you have there, it's really very beautiful, and we really get very encouraged when we visit those offices. If you look at New York, Mr. Speaker, we are renting a property as Kenyan government when Uganda has a very huge building in New York City. Really, it's so embarrassing. And I want to know what the ministry is doing as far as this office accommodation is concerned. I thank you.
Prime CS, you may now proceed to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are several critical issues that have been raised, so I'll respond to them not in any specific order, but just as I was taking the notes. Now, the first issue is to do with the tribal or ethnic balance that was raised. I want to state very clearly that it is our intention, and we are very deliberate, that we need our missions always to reflect the face of Kenya, the diversity of Kenya, and therefore we will work to achieve this in all our missions. I may not have everything in terms of the community that one comes from, but I took note of what Mongatana was saying, and it's a very pertinent point, that in the deployment of officers, it is important that all parts of Kenya are represented. And I would want to believe that I'll be better prepared to respond to this particular question, even as a separate item. The second point I'd like to point out on this particular issue is that the question that arises about the ratio of the career diplomats and the incoming or other appointees that are infused from other sectors, whether private sector or the political realm, that come into the diplomatic space. And that again is a valid question. And Mr. Speaker, I want to perhaps announce to the House today that we are in the process of formulating a sessional paper which will be discussed by Parliament. And one of the critical issues that we'll be putting across in this sessional paper is for us to have a conversation as a country through our leadership as legislators, so that we can establish a reasonable ratio, so that we can have career progression for the diplomats who are in office or working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But at the same time, we can also work closely to bring in some infusion from outside, because it's always good to have this injection of ideas and approaches from the outside world. We should not necessarily be incestuous permanently in this context. We should be able to infuse with other people. So this is going to be a very critical issue in that conversation. And I will be appealing to members to give it very good thought when the sessional paper is availed for this conversation. The other point I want to quickly point out was the issue of how many consulates can we open. We would have liked to have more, but we are constrained financially, and that is why we are still operating with the LA as the consulate in the United States. If resources permit in future, we can indeed increase the number of consulates. On the issue of the voting, I think it's important that this is a conversation that we shall have to have jointly with the IEBC, because again, when it comes to the issues of voter registration and access, that is a domain that falls within the IEBC. And we at Foreign Affairs would be more of a facilitator, but we cannot try to usurp the role of the IEBC in terms of voter registration, and which should be the centers, but we can have a conversation at the appropriate time. I wish to make a correction. Indeed, I may have indicated the LA consulate and the New York consulate. Maybe I didn't communicate well. This was raised by Honorable Osotsi. I wish to state that indeed in New York, we have a permanent mission. And in that permanent mission, which is the busiest station, as you say, we have an authorized establishment of 18, and they're in place, save for 4, as we speak now in New York. So perhaps that's an addition of supplemented information I will make available to show that the permanent mission is well staffed and there are people in station. The issue of our foreign service assets, that is the properties that we own and the ones that we may not own. That is a very, very important issue, because rental payments in the foreign countries is a very big burden. It consumes quite a lot of money in some of the stations. But I'm pleased to announce to the Kenyans that, through the Senate, to the Kenyans that as we speak now, Kenya bought a whole floor just next to the United Nations headquarters, and that is where the permanent mission is now domiciled. That's where the chancery is. So we have taken care of that particular item. We cannot, we missed our chances then. When Uganda bought, that was way back during the time of Idi Amin Dada. That's when he bought the asset for Uganda. We cannot say that we can afford to have the resources to buy a new building or a building today in New York, but we have money to secure a whole floor, which is now occupied by the mission. I also want to state that in terms of our global assets, which we are talking about, in New York, we have some properties as well, and in other stations, and we are developing a strategy on how to realize the value of our global assets, which includes development of the various properties, and to see how we can seek different financing mechanisms, either through PPP or joint programs with even some of our Kenyan financial institutions to be able to develop the assets that we have in different countries. And this again is a detail we'll share in the sessional paper that we shall be presenting to you. Mr. Speaker, I cannot speak for the American immigration policy. They have their own policy, and therefore we can only raise concerns on some of the issues and perhaps seek some negotiations, but we cannot impose our will on the American immigration policy. I have personally had my own experiences where sometimes what the ambassador is doing, they can become very clear and tell you that the State Department for Immigration is independent and handles its issues separately. So it takes much more. But I can say that as we negotiate the strategic trade and investment partnership agreement, that is the STIP, with the United States, and the negotiations are quite advanced, we hope that some of these issues can be tackled within the framework of that conversation. There is the issue of the compensation of the victims of the blast. We are pursuing that matter following the resolution of the House on that, so that we can engage formally with the Parliament or the Congress in the US. This is now underway following the resolution that was passed by our members of the legislature. And at an appropriate time, we will be able to report progress systematically, because it's a process that has to engage with your counterparts on the other side. There is one thing that I want to state, that indeed economic diplomacy is very critical to us. The United States is perhaps now our largest market when it comes to the export of apparel. We are close to, I think we are the largest exporter to them, and the market continues to grow. So we take our relationship with the United States very, very seriously in this context as a key and fundamental trading partner. And that is why you will find that during the recent state visit by the President, certain key issues were undertaken of enhancing the trade and partnership between us and the United States. As I've said, we are also negotiating the Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership Agreement, and there are other programs that the Kenya government is working very, very closely with the United States, which have a major bearing on the economies of both countries, but more so on the Kenyan economy. Mr. Speaker, there's one issue that I may need to get a little more clarification, but that was the issue of the dual citizenship and the Maisha card. If the Speaker allows, we can do a little more research on this specific item and communicate to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Senator Muma.
My question on policy, the policy on the ratio between diplomats, politically appointed diplomats and career diplomats.
I did respond to it. I said that we may not have a firm figure, but for instance, I could give you what I think. For instance, a proportion of about 70% for the career diplomats and 30% for the infusion would be a fairly decent arrangement. But as I said, we are giving a more thought-out process that will appear in the sessional paper, which we shall bring to Parliament for discussion. Thank you.
Senator, yes, Senator Mudama.
Yes.
Your question has not been responded to adequately.
It has been responded, but Mr. Speaker, I just want to ask the CS if he can listen to me. Mr. CS, if you can listen. Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to request him.
Senator Kavindu, you know, under standing order.
He was talking and you are not seeing, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kavindu, just have your seat. Please take your seat. Please.
That's what I was.
Just take your seat. You see, under standing orders, and more particularly standing order 51(7)C, 51(C)(7)C, states that the senator who has the primary question has a chance to ask 2 supplementary questions. Any other senator can only ask 1 supplementary question, which we do not have the provisions on standing order. All right, proceed. If you need clarification, that's quite okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to tell Mr. CS that, Honorable CS, that these people have been waiting for their compensation for the last 26 good years. Many of them are dying. So as much as we are in good relationship with the Americans, and we don't want to offend them, but let's follow up for the compensation of our people, please. They are dying in poverty. They are perishing in poverty. And even as a country, as Kenyans, we've not been able to assist them with anything, even medical assistance. Thank you.
Senator Jeriot.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Prime CS for finding time to respond to these questions. And it's not just in this House. I must appreciate him for his diligence, even outside this House, how he responds to issues raised by Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, my question is to piggyback on what Senator Sifuna had initially asked. Availability of government services, actually, to our citizens in the diaspora. I know, Mr. Speaker, that through eCitizen, Kenyans are now able to access thousands of government services online, and they're able to pay for the same and quickly receive solutions to their problems. The challenge with our diaspora citizens is that these services are either not available or a help desk to help them maybe respond to the issues such as what Senator Sifuna was speaking about, ID applications, renewal of passports, and the same. Yet, these are services that I want to believe, if his ministry, alongside the other state department that is in charge of citizen services, like e-citizen, Mr. Speaker, were to set up a help desk across our consulars, Mr. Speaker, then citizens will be saved from the trouble of having to travel thousands of kilometers sometimes, wasting money and time to access certain critical government services. So the question in brief, Mr. Speaker, is when are they going to make e-citizen services easily accessible and the issues that citizens have easily resolvable, Mr. Speaker, so that they don't struggle? I thank you.
Senator Eddy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the CS, the Prime CS, for being in the House today to answer these questions. I also wanted to piggyback on Senator Sifuna's questions on the efficiency of staffing, and particularly narrow it down to legal services. Looking at the United States, Mr. Speaker, having studied there and lived there for over 8 years, and having ties to the United States, Mr. Speaker, with the diaspora, the Kenyan in the diaspora, Mr. Speaker, there is a lot of challenges for our people there with regards to legal representations. Mr. Speaker, as you know, in the United States as well as other countries where our people are found, there are a number of people who get arrested, whether genuinely or for reasons otherwise. And after those arrests, some of them end up being incarcerated to the extent that their families cannot be able to access them. They don't have legal services. Mr. Speaker, a case in example is a former prominent presidential candidate, Mohamed Abdu Badida, who was incarcerated, and for months, almost 2 years, even our government did not know that he was under bars. He was behind bars, Mr. Speaker. And I just wonder whether there is proper legal services across the 52 states, because I know that in DC is where we have got 1 or 2 legal representations, but what is the ministry doing to make sure that our people in the United States have got representation across the United States? And is this also extended as services to other countries where we are seeing problems like war in Lebanon, where legal representation is a problem, as well as evacuation of our people in Lebanon? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Miraj.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question to the CS is concerning our sisters who are on the run in the Saudi Arabia, whom, after following up with your ministry, I was updated that the Department for Diaspora had conducted some DNA tests because the sisters of ours had kids in the foreign country. And there's been a problem of them being deported with their kids back to Kenya. So my question is, for how long are our sisters to wait for this? Because they are not able to access the rescue centers in Saudi. So they are living on the run with small kids who are exposed to so many cruelty to the women who are left to take care of them. So my question is, Mr. CS, for how long do our sisters have to survive on the run while the matter is already in the attention of the ministry, and they are supposed to have been paying some legal fees for them to have the ownership of their kids? So my question is, for how long will our sisters be exposed in the Saudi Arabia before the government can take the necessary actions to bring them back with their kids to their nation? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Onyonka Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I would like to say that I'm happy to see the Cabinet Secretary who is somebody I've worked with before and somebody I know very well. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to say that I am giving my appreciation of the fact that when about 2 weeks ago, we had an incident in Mali, and I called somebody in your ministry and told them that there are Kenyans who are in trouble, and I was surprised, pleasantly surprised that the government was able to engage that team overnight, and the following morning, in fact, the Kenyans who are in trouble responded back and said, we are safe, and thank you for intervening, and they thanked the officer in the ministry. I forget her name, and she did an excellent job. Mr. Speaker, the question I'm actually asking the CS is that when you look at what is happening in Lebanon, I've not seen the Kenyan government come up either explaining to the public what you intend to do with Kenyans who have been working there. There are cases of Kenyans who are calling us back. Do you have any plans to airlift those Kenyans in case the war continues? And is there a possibility that you can actually set up a fund from now on? Because most of the money that members of the Kenyan community are giving us in form of contributions or diaspora transfers is a lot of money. So I would like the minister to tell us whether there's a possibility they can set up a fund, and if possible, if it works well, so that anytime we have an emergency and anytime there are cases where Kenyans who are working outside Kenya and they're in trouble, whether there's a possibility that we can always airlift our people back and make sure that every Kenyans are safe, because the world is becoming a bit volatile. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator for Nandi, Senator Chiranke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mine is on the issue of, you see, Mr. Speaker, the money that came to this country through foreign exchange honor was 15,966 million in February 2024, according to the Central Bank of the Republic of Kenya. My question, Mr. Speaker, because this is the highest foreign exchange honor to the Republic, is about labor attaches. Mr. Speaker, you are aware the CS of labor was in this house a few months ago. My concern is what is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and through the Prime Cabinet Secretary on the issue of labor attaches to ensure our young men and women, because the President has just signed what we call labor, there was the labor migration bill, and the President has signed for more people or young people to be taken. And Mr. Speaker, even on the issue of legal services, Mr. Speaker, you are aware we only have one legal advisor in New York. I remember there was a frustrated person from Kapsabet a few months ago, and I shared with the PS of Foreign Affairs. My concern, Mr. Speaker, what is the role of the Department of Diaspora Affairs in terms of handling such matters? Because I remember when I shared with the PS of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Speaker, the intervention took long. But my concern, it should be the Office of the Diaspora of Foreign Affairs through the PS, who is my very good neighbor. And he normally comes to Nandi occasionally, and he has even relatives. What can he do, Mr. Speaker, on these two matters that I've raised? I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Olekina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me begin by appreciating the Prime Cabinet Secretary. These proceedings, Mr. Speaker, are live. And while seated here, I've just received a question from a Kenyan who live in the United States and another one who live in the UK. And their concern is one. The concern has got to do with a fiduciary responsibility of our embassies across the country. In the UK, the query is very simple. And Mr. Speaker, you'll allow me to refer to my message which has just been sent to me. And this relates to the address number 45 Portland Place, London, United Kingdom. And then the sort code is W1A 4GA. And the concern here is a very basic concern. It has to do with filing of annual returns for Government of Kenya. These are returns which are required for every embassy across. The United Kingdom requires this. So my question to the Prime Cabinet Secretary is that, are you aware that filing of annual returns by the government of Kenya has not been consistent, specifically for the High Commission Office in the United Kingdom? And if so, what can be done to be able to ensure that we have a check system that will guarantee that we are compliant in those countries? Number two also has to do with our embassies abroad. Do we have any embassies that we own? And I ask this because of the issue of Uganda. Uganda, across the world, Idi Amin did something very, very honorable. He bought buildings for in every country. In New York, it's actually a walking distance to the United Nations headquarters. So I just wanted to confirm whether we have some that we own, and also whether we are compliant in filing our returns, and if we are renting, if we are compliant in paying our rent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Manzadani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while I ask a question in relation to Senator Sifuna's matter, I want to give the Cabinet Secretary good news from his office that recently a Catholic sister from my village who is working in Argentina sought help for good conduct so that she could be processed. And I just advised her on phone to get in touch with the ministry online. And Mr. Speaker, I want to surprise the Cabinet Secretary. Within 2 days, she had, everything had been processed and she was able to be employed in Argentina. And that shows that somebody somewhere, and this was the legal department, is doing something good in your ministry. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, is there a policy in the event a Kenyan dies abroad? A lot of times, and especially those countries which do not keep bodies for long, especially countries which do cremation, and especially Islamic countries where funeral is conducted in a day. When a Kenyan passes away abroad, it becomes such a challenge, Mr. Speaker, such that by the time you get the body home, it has almost become the responsibility of member of parliament or senator. Is there a policy, and so that there is a desk where Kenyans can report, and because of our culture, our own people who are deceased could be taken care of with urgency, and the families could be settled during bereavement? I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime CS, you may now proceed to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must say that as we talk, there are what you might call emerging issues as well in this conversation. But let me start by saying that I think, and I believe what Honorable Senator Cheriot had in mind was to develop a Huduma Center approach to providing services for Kenyans in the diaspora in different capitals. And I think there is merit in this, and I can state that indeed, as we work with other departments, it's something that we are trying to enhance, especially around our consular services, so that there's a one-stop center for the services that Kenyans require. I wish to respond to some of the other issues in the following manner. The question of legal services, it is important, but I want to also just mention to the Kenyans that we are talking of almost 3.5 million Kenyans out there in different parts of the globe. Of course, the United States has the highest population, but in all the countries, we are talking of almost 3 million plus Kenyans who are in the diaspora. And the best we can do is that as much as we can have legal advisory services, sometimes within the embassies, depending on the resources available, we would strongly advocate that going forward, perhaps we can improve on this in terms of whether we have sufficient resources to back this particular service. But you will appreciate also that sometimes we have cases where Kenyans are in distress, and some can signal the embassy and say they are in distress. There are others who do not speak at all when they are in distress, so you sometimes stumble on information, but maybe it was not volunteered by the person in question. And this is the example of the Dida case. We were reading about it. When he left, when he went, obviously it was his personal decision. But the communication as to his whereabouts or what he was doing, he was silent on this. So it becomes very difficult to be able to keep track on some of these. But our missions have intervened in various circumstances to try and guide Kenyans in distress and help them to access legal services in different areas. But please remember, it is a very expensive undertaking, and we would be misleading the House if we said that we can take up this role directly. It can be maybe under very special circumstances that an intervention is done. On the issue of Kenyans who may have died abroad, in the last, I think in the course of this year, Kenya, the Kenyan Foreign Ministry has assisted about 18 cases of Kenyans who may have died under different circumstances. And our embassies, our missions, have been of assistance in trying to repatriate the remains to the country. And again, as I say, this is when the distress and the circumstances are on a case-by-case basis that you analyze and see what the circumstances are. We have the bilateral labor agreements, which we are working on. We have negotiated some, like with Germany, with Austria. These are now concluded. There are others that are in the pipeline. For instance, the Saudi government, we are working on how to improve our engagement when it comes to the labor movement. Recently, for instance, the Qatar Minister for Labor was here, and this was a conversation on how we can advance the conversation between Kenya and Qatar. So we'll continue streamlining the bilateral labor agreements so that any issue of immigration or migrant workers is in conformity with the international law. It also conforms to matters of human rights, and through these bilateral agreements we want to try and secure the dignity of Kenyans in the various places that they prefer to work in. On the issue of Lebanon, I just want to state that one, we have about 26,000 Kenyans in Lebanon, and obviously evacuating 26,000 is a very massive undertaking. But as a measure, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, through our embassy in Kuwait, was sending out messages so that those who are in distress can register. Even before the war escalated, this was ongoing. And I think we had received almost about 1,500 or so who had registered with the embassy indicating that they may need support for evacuation. The others were quiet. And believe you me, Kenyans, senators, we also had a situation where the Kenyans there, out of their own volition, say they don't want to move. they want to hold out until the situation cools down. So we have that dilemma as well of Kenyans who hope for the best and do not want to move, and you cannot force them because we have to handle this in a humanitarian way. But the government of Kenya has set aside 100 million, and there's a committee in the Foreign Affairs working with the security and other agencies to see how this 100 million can be utilized to assist in the evacuation of Kenyans who are in Lebanon at this point in time. I may need to seek further clarification from the Honorable Senator Olekena because the issue of the returns, maybe I need guidance a little more on what are the specifics of these returns, because we are also under the diplomatic arrangements, so we may need to seek clarification, and then we can tackle that particular issue. You came in and you did touch on the investments that Uganda made at that time. I think they were very lucky and they were wise in a way, but I had responded to it partially by saying that right now in New York, for instance, Kenya has bought a floor in a building, and I'm happy to state that during the UNGA conference, the Senator Ledama was with us in that very space that has been bought by the Kenyans in New York. But we have other assets. We have residential assets and so forth. And when we said that we have a global strategy, a strategy being developed for our global assets, we are going to share this conversation with you so that we can all have a unified position as Kenyans on how we can unleash the value and the potential of the assets we have in different countries abroad. There are quite a number, whether on the African continent, Europe, or now as we are talking in the US and so forth, or Asia. We need time to have a serious conversation on these assets. I wish to reiterate the issue about compensation, which the Senator for Machakos raised, and I want to reiterate that we are looking at it, but we must be conscious of the fact that we cannot dictate to the American Congress. We can submit Kenya's situation, but the procedure of their operations, their standing orders, we cannot override that as a country. But we continue engaging so that the matter can receive the necessary attention from the Congress. Thank you.
Yes, your question hasn't been responded to adequately.
Mr. Speaker, I think the PCS forgot to respond on my labor attaches, considering, apart from the agreements on labor immigration, whether our 52 consulate and embassies have attaches to assist, especially transiting Kenyans to new labor environments.
You may proceed, Honorable Prime CS.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me, Senator Nandi. Not all our missions. We cannot have labor attaches in all the missions, and it's all a question of the resource and assessing the demand in a specific area. But under the consular services, we are trying to provide a holistic response and advice and support to issues that may be labor related. Thank you.
Senator Shakila.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is regarding the dual citizenship. There is an issue whereby it is clearly enshrined in the Constitution, people are entitled for dual citizenship, but it has proved to be very difficult
if any Kenyan from diaspora is requesting for citizenship here in our country, it is more expensive than getting a citizenship outside in the foreign country. I don't know what measures the ministry is putting to ensure that our Kenyans who are outside the country, they are entitled for their constitutional right by acquiring a dual citizenship, and if there's any special department which they can go and get their passports without further delays or bribing or any kind of challenges. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Prime CS, proceed to respond, please.
Mr. Speaker, the only department that would deal with this is the Immigration Department. As I indicated, I think it was raised a little bit earlier, that we may need to have some specifics on some of this so that we can jointly with the Immigration Department identify the bottlenecks so that we can make this a little smoother. So if the Honourable Senator has some time, I wouldn't mind having some conversation on some detail on the specific cases that you'll be talking about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Prime CS, for showing up for purposes of responding to these questions. There being no other questions directed to the Prime Cabinet Secretary, from my dashboard, there is no senator wishing to ask any question, and therefore, Prime Cabinet Secretary, you are free to leave the chamber.